Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have got a wonderful guest on. The reason why I say a wonderful guest is because the sport of MMA, a lot of things you'll see online is fluff and sparkles and glitz and glam. You'll get your interviews, your standard fight interviews, and the questions are generic. And you know what we're like here. We don't always go for this, the kind of set guest list and the same questions. We get varied guests from all over, from all aspects of the MMA world. And the one guest I've got right now, he's been putting out some fantastic work. Mike Russell, thank you so much, firstly, for joining me. And can you please tell people at home that your website to go on to read this work we're about to talk about?
Absolutely. It's realfightstories.com is my website.
Ladies and gentlemen, and the story we're going to talk about, the man has done 3 pieces so far on this, and I'll be honest with you, it looks like I think a book should be done because there is that much that can be put into it. Ali Abdel Aziz. Now that's the name I'm going to use right now, but who knows what name we're going to find out next year from. I think it's clear. Look, we know that people around the MMA scene know about this and what's come up, because there was, you're not the only first person to report about Ali. That, in a sense that I remember Bloody Elbow mentioned about it, how there was the contrast with him being a manager and obviously a promoter, a vice president for a promotion. And that's a conflict of interest for, you're not allowed to do this with the Athletic State Commission, the commissions. But there's a bit more to Ali than meets the eye. Now, Mike, we're going to, obviously I could say tell us all, but I think
it'll take you a few days.
It'll take a few days. So we're going to try and mini condense it down and maybe just pick some points out. Let's go back to the start. I want to ask how and why you came about this whole beginnings. Like, how did you start writing about this and why?
Sure. Right around 2013, there were some fighters that had approached me that had been having some issues with Ali. So I started digging in kind of on his conflicts of interest as being a manager and a matchmaker. And, I'd uncovered that he was trying to strong arm some fighters into signing with him. And he was using, inflated World Series of Fighting purses to entice sponsors or other managers to get into bed with him and, trade sponsorships of equal value. So they were kind of monopolizing things, and he definitely had these conflicts of interest. So I actually put a complaint in with World Series of Fighting back then and, spoke to, I think it was Sean Lampman at the time, and was hoping that things had been done. And then I kind of, didn't really follow up on the story because I left journalism for a while. But when I read Paul Gift's story and when I read John Nash's stories over at Bloody Elbow, kind of, sparked my interest again, because I'd remembered all these things that I'd brought to the attention of World Series of Fighting that nobody really knew about. So, I thought I might write on my own site about it, and, started on Twitter kind of mentioning it. And then all of a sudden, I start getting tips in, and, it's amazing how the community, the MMA community that knows all these things, wants to come together and kind of, shine a light on dirty areas of the sport that we want cleaning up. But yeah, somebody kind of gave me the tip to look into his background in New York with the NYPD, and lo and behold, I came upon this book that he'd collaborated on in 2011.
And I have now, when this gets released, there will be a list of fighters that I've suddenly been blocked by on Twitter, which is no doubt going to happen. And I am prepared to take that because I am vested in the sport, not my own interests about getting certain guests on. I'm not bothered about that. I'm bothered about cleaning up the sport, so to speak. And this is why I want your words and your information to get out there, because like we said before, we spoke off air. You're not going to see this, ladies and gentlemen, on MMA Fighting website. You're not going to see it on the MMA Junkie place. You're not going to see it on places like that. I think you might see it if something happens with the Nevada Commission when he goes up to face, so to speak, his questions. I think if he was to be found guilty, they would probably put it out there, because then, he's being found guilty. He'll be his license will be revoked, etc. He'll be gone, so to speak, from the MMA community in that way. And that's when they'll probably speak up, because they won't have any ties to him. But at the moment, because he has got so many fighters under his book, and especially some of them are high level names, Frankie Edgar, Rafael dos Anjos, Derek Brunson. There's some top guys there. the people like that, the MMA Junkie and MMA Fighting, they want to keep them in their good books, which is frustrating. Does it annoy you a little bit, like you said, when you see interviews with their fighters and no one asks them any questions and stuff like that?
Yeah, I get it. There's sponsorship riding on it, like some ad buys on some of these sites that get paid by people at World Series of Fighting. Perhaps they were set up through Ali because he has certain relationships. He gives a lot of scoops to a lot of different reporters. So, I understand it, but what bothers me is that a lot of the reporters that are doing somersaults and ignoring everything, they know that my credentials and my background, I've never lied about anything. I've never made up a story. I've never had anything that I've embellished on. My track record of writing investigative pieces kind of speaks for itself, especially, some of the people that I've worked with in the past that have kind of ignored the story. So, I get it, but it's definitely disappointing when, people that claim that they're journalists are avoiding the situation completely.
And that's why I respect the work that you do, and that's why you're here. And another guest I've had on the past is Karim Zidane. I have so much time for him with his work. The stuff that he
Karim's great.
The stuff he brings up from Russia and the kind of Chechen stuff. It's absolutely, it blows my mind. It's beautiful stuff to see. And the fact, again, it's not glitz and glam, so it doesn't get the attention it does. And you know what, people, look, every sport, every aspect, everything in life, pretty much, there's a dirty side to something. We're just trying to kind of get it out there. And look, you're going to have to listen to this. So look, let's talk about Ali. Or whatever, whatever we can call him.
Well, many aliases.
Yeah, one thing we can certainly say is he is not an Olympic judoka. That is something we can certainly cross off the line, which is where I suppose the story starts or begins, really.
Yeah, it is. He actually came over under the cover of the '96 Olympic Games. He and a cousin came over from Cairo, and they claim they were volunteers. That's just from secondhand accounts from what they've told people. I'm not 100% sure if they ever made it to the games, but I do know that they landed briefly in New York City before meeting with members of the Muslims of America at a mosque in Brooklyn. And next thing you know, they're in Colorado Springs, where they're also associating with the group, meeting with them several times a week. So, that was kind of, where they entered into the picture, and Ali actually sold some clothes, some counterfeit clothing that he got from a member of the group, and he sold counterfeit DVDs. So that was kind of what funded his stay here in America at the beginning. So, there's been interviews where he said, I've worked hard for everything, and, I've had my own businesses. Well, that was the business that he fraudulently started up as soon as he came to the United States.
Now, the Muslims of America, for example, if I live in Canada, like yourself, or if I lived in Australia or England, somewhere that might not know what this is, what are they, firstly, just to give people an idea of who they are?
Sure. The group was kind of mainly made up of a lot of African-American converts to Islam. So a lot of these people, historically converted while in prison. So there's a lot of criminal element kind of right at the roots of this group. So, there were some Black Panthers that kind of converted to Islam through the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood was kind of where this group got its start. So, this unknown sheik from Pakistan comes into Brooklyn in the late 70s, early 80s, wearing gun belts and preaching, at mosques about how everybody needs to learn to protect themselves, and, Muslims need to learn how to stand up for themselves. And it really caught the attention of a lot of these, kind of poor black neighborhoods in Brooklyn. So, he built this group that followed him like the Quran says you're not to follow a cleric. So, they were basically worshiping the cleric like they should have been worshiping the God, which is Muhammad. So, there's right from the beginning, he was recruiting them to go over and fight against the Russians in Afghanistan. So a lot of these training videos that have been released, and I've kind of spoken about them in some of the stories, I've talked to some experts about them, and they said, yeah, they were making them, and they'd say that they were doing all this planning for their brothers over in Kashmir that were struggling, but a lot of these tactics and techniques were being used and utilized and trained to people right on their land. So, a lot of these people never had any intention of going over. including a group of women that you can be seen in one of the films, training, how to slash people's throats from behind, how to choke people, how to shoot people. There was quite a lot of very scary tactics that were being taught in these films that people just kind of, I guess think it's a right-wing conspiracy theory, but I've seen a lot of documents that disprove that, and I've spoken to a lot of law enforcement agencies and members of these agencies who have given me some very chilling details. So, I like you, I just think it's important that when people are dealing with Ali Abdel Aziz, they know exactly who they're dealing with and they know the risks involved, because I'd hate for something to happen with, the knowledge that I have, and the MMA community has had some devastating losses. I'd hate to see that go any further.
And that's the thing about it. You got to think he had that beginning in the United States. So that's the beginning in the United States. We have no idea how his upbringing in Egypt was, to an extent. We have no idea what he could have been doing there. But what we know so far is, straight away from the start, it wasn't clean. It wasn't, let's say, legal is the best way to put this. No. Now, you got to think, if that's his practice then, the practice he has now is pretty much the same. There's not much changed over that time, but there's been he's been keeping that behavior consistent, though, and that's the thing about it. He's just wearing a different kind of outfit each time.
Yeah, and I see that. I see the fact that a lot of his business practices he learned, like he was 18 when he came over here in 96. So, 18, 19 years old, you don't really have a lot of business acumen. So every business dealing that he learned about, between being a CI, he ran a car lot with one of the leaders of the group at one point that he owned. A lot of his business dealings were where he was taught how to do things, illegally, throw a little money over here, buy some support, buy this guy off by doing this. And I see that, a lot of people in MMA, especially fighters who are struggling for cash, they're looking at that as, he's putting a lot of money in my pocket, even though he's taken a lot from me as well. It's still more than I would have gotten elsewhere because he has access to the cookie jar. But, when you look at the fact that he's not licensed and he's got this criminal background and he's been breaking laws and rules, I think it would be a big mistake if the Nevada Athletic Commission doesn't look into this a lot deeper. And, with Pat Lundville gone, that's the one fear that I have. She was my main point of communication with the commission because Bob Bennett has ignored my phone calls and emails for about the last 10 months. And I brought that up to Miss Lundville about how it was a concern of mine, that I thought maybe they were sweeping things under the rug and they didn't investigate Ali the first time around, to the best of their abilities, because there was clear evidence that he was breaking the rules and breaking laws, and they basically just gave him an ultimatum, and he says they didn't. I believe they did, that you choose one or the other. You can't do both, which is what World Series of Fighting has done from day one, too, and he didn't do it. So, guessing that that's going to happen is, or trusting him that that's going to happen when he's repeatedly lied and deceived people and, shuffled things under his wife's name, which was a big mistake on his part. He also used to... His big scam was he'd have other managers pretend, or other representatives in MMA, sponsors and such like that, pretend that they managed people so that when he matched them, it didn't look bad on paper when he mismatched them. So, there's a lot more to the onion, I think, than even I've even touched on yet. But it paints a very clear picture of the things and the person that you're dealing with if you do business with Ali. So, that's just my only goal here, is like it's always been. I just like to shine a light on things.
Well, that is the thing about what made me worried more, because being a competitor in MMA, was the matchmaking side of things with World Series of Fighting. The fact that he would give his fighter a more favourable fight, because at the end of the day, people, a fight anyone can win any fight. Let's be honest. Like, there's no such thing as a gimme, because anyone can knock anyone's ass out. Look, we know this. We've seen it too many times. There's, honestly, this year, especially in the year 2016, there has been a hell of a lot of underdogs winning that we did not expect. So look, even though he had more favourable matchups for his managed guys in World Series of Fighting, and the other thing, they were paid a horrendously high fee compared to other competitors on that card. That was one thing that griped me as well, big time with World Series Fighting. I remember seeing one of the fight cards, And a guy on that promotion, World Series of Fighting, who proclaimed to be this giant promotion, who claimed to be second or third biggest in the world, right? They claim this, it's fine.
Yep.
Who had a guy on who made $700, it worked out about £700, I think it was, about £700,
yep.
maybe $800, $900, something like that, depending on the exchange rate. And I sat there and went, hang on a minute, because I know the tax in America is not low, it's quite high tax, so I thought, when he takes that tax away, and then he gets what's left over, then how much is he actually getting out of that? And I just couldn't get I thought, why would you even bother wasting your time? You're not going to be, he was the first fight of the card. It doesn't matter if he's the first or last, first fight or the last fight. That amount of money is terrible. He was never going to get shown on TV, so he could have easily just went off to a different promotion and probably made more money selling tickets in a smaller show in a regional area. But and that was horrendous. I remember he got that much, and then one of the main guys got about $80,000. That's just, it's a crazy deficit.
And the worst part about that is you have to look at who he was fighting. You go through the list, and if it was a guy that Ali was setting up, it makes you wonder, was it worth it for you to come in for a setup fight that, you could lose your eyesight, could, brain health, everything else. I know a list of fights like that he basically brought in a patsy to lose, and a couple of these guys, like you said, they won. So, one guy, you look at the salary disparity, he beat Ali's guy. Ali's guy made $35,000 just to fight. He would have made another $35,000 presumably. And this was a guy that had a little bit of name value, but had a fairly okay record. But he brought this guy in specifically to lose to him because he handpicked a guy that played to his weaknesses, and the guy beat him. He made, I think, $7,000 or $12,000 to beat a guy that made $35,000 to lose, and it was just because Ali was inflating the purses. So. It serves him right, but he's screwed with a lot of careers when things like that happen, and he thought he got the worst of the setup.
Yeah, that's the thing. I get a bit upset on that side of things, because being a fighter, competing, and it grinds me, that stuff, because I think I'd love to meet that. I'd love to meet, if I was me trying to get set up, I would love to have met him, and I'd be like, listen, Sunshine, I'm going to knock your boy out, and then I'm going to probably go and knock you out, Sunshine. That's what my thoughts would have been with him, but... Again, the discrepancy, like you said, we mentioned before, I was going to bring it up, his wife, I feel for his wife, because she is put in a, I don't know what she looks like, so it depends on if I'd feel her, but she is put in a really sore position, because I don't know how much she's in on this, but at the same time, she's proclaimed to be the top dog at dominance, the fighter agent, when we all know, and there is tons of evidence to show that she has zero context with that company, zero interaction with the fighters, she does nothing. Yeah, we see Ali.
She's got 4 kids she takes care of. So Ali's, out doing everything else, and she's at home with her kids. But the problem is, all it would take is to be like, one phone call to Joe Silva. Who do you deal with? One phone call to Sean Shelby. Who do you deal with? One phone call to Bellator, who do you deal with when we book fights? And you know what? It's all going to come out. It's just the fact that the NAC has let on, that they don't have a very great investigative resource team. So, hopefully they just say, we can't do this, let's pass it on. Because as you start going through all the different charges against these people, like, claims against them and things that we're bringing up, it all starts to add up to look like it's a criminal organization.
Well, I do that's the thing that gets me about Ray Sefo. I don't believe he is as stupid as it makes out. That when you look at everything, when you look at all, I think, is he that stupid that he couldn't see this? And then I think to myself, right, come on, Ray.
Yeah. I've had a couple conversations with Ray about this. And one of them was, when I released my first story, I had an early release where I sold them for like $1 a copy or something like that, just to cover my administration fees. I didn't sell that many, maybe a dozen, maybe a couple dozen. I don't know what it was, but somebody got a hold of it and got Ray in touch with me, and Ray called me all concerned about the story, saying that Ali was concerned that ISIS was going to get him if this story came out. And ISIS had nothing to do with this. It was just the biggest name at the time. He brought up, who's the biggest, baddest wolf, that I can get sympathy for. He started saying, oh, my kids are at risk. My family back home's at risk. Well, the book had been out since 2011. So, Ray, when I told him all of this, he was like, actually, he told me that he called Ali a scumbag because of it. And, now you look at his Instagram feed, his Twitter feed, he's supporting him. I think he's just, he's chosen which side to side with, and it's going to be pretty embarrassing when he flip-flops 2 or 3 times. But, on the phone to me, he was pretty sympathetic. He let on he didn't know about Ali's past. About 2 or 3 weeks go by, and somebody tells me that he was in a meeting in 2014, and we spoke December 2015. So a year prior, he was in that meeting where they discovered the book and the contents of the book, saw a video with Ali's picture in it, put 2 and 2 together. They were concerned about the safety of a World Series of Fighting event and that there could be a terror attack because this group, documented FBI files prove that they're known for a proclivity for using, for revenge and for using bombings and fire bombings for their revenge. So, of course, they should have looked into it. They should have made some calls to law enforcement. They should have taken Ali to task. I know another executive that was given the same story that I was given by someone else, and he asked Ali about it, and Ali had, I was a patriot, and I was just trying to help all these children. But what he didn't tell them was he has a kid in the group. He wasn't helping anybody but himself by marrying a girl and having a child with her to get close to her brother so he could be better paid by the NYPD ultimately. So, his MO has never been any different than it is now. It's always been to get the most money he can, be it by, he did actually offer a lot of intelligence. I won't say anything about that, but he also gave some false intelligence to the NYPD, which caused them to kind of fall out of favor with him. And, when they couldn't trust him anymore and they started assuming that maybe he was helping out the other side, of course you're going to cut ties with somebody like that.
Yeah, I was thinking as in the sense that when he's given that much information and he's given bad information, you think, well, what information is he giving the other side? Is he giving them good information and bad information? I think he was probably trying to play both parties, so he got the best and the most out of both sides. So again, so it benefited himself. So he walked away with, maybe cash, maybe just a better kind of setup, and off he went, and he got what he needed, and he just didn't let everything else burn behind him, so to speak, and watch it all fall apart. And it did, especially for the NYPD. They lost their department, didn't they?
You know what? It had a big impact on the way that they functioned in the future, but there were definitely some officers that left because of it. He revealed, the author of that book revealed the identity of a guy who had an undercover name. He was an NYPD detective. You know what I mean? So, and then, you hear these stories from other people in law enforcement telling me that there were threats made to, his mother. They showed up at her house, Ali called his elderly mother looking for her son. This was after they'd cut him loose. He was traveling and following him around town, and they actually gave him that ankle bracelet because they felt there was a credible threat on his life. So you never know with these people. And here's the other thing: if Ali really did do, all this spying on these people, and he was actually helping the NYPD and the FBI and the CIA, then why did he not hide after all of this? Because this group is known for violence. Known for violence. Why did he not run? Why did he not try to change his identity? He actually increased his visibility, and he tweets all the time about where he is and everything else. He's got friends on Facebook that are current members of the group that he apparently flipped on and screwed over. So, maybe he's claiming that he only helped them in a few ways, but, he did put some people away for things that were non-terrorism related that he's, probably claiming that that's all he did. But, we'll never know because the documents have been shredded and there's not a very good record. But as I've been finding, people that are involved with certain things keep a lot of things. So there are documents that I'll be probably releasing in the next few weeks.
I was going to say, it'd be very difficult to get the truth as well out of Ali. In fact, let's be honest, we're not going to get the truth out of him. It wouldn't benefit him in any way to admit the truth. And this is the thing about it. It's such a shame because you think, even though World Series of Fighting is not as big as an organisation as they say they are, his face is, emerged with WSOF all the time. There's still clearly some kind of link with the pair of them and the promotion. It's obvious.
Yeah, what's funny is that when everything first happened, they demoted him and they said he's only going to help with sales. Don't worry about it. We're eliminating the conflict. And then the day that my story came out, that was actually the morning that Ray Sefo called me, concerned, and I kind of filled him in on some things as a courtesy, gave him a heads up of where he could read about the book, everything else. And he was trying to talk me out of actually printing it. And he wasn't the only one. I had other people, in the MMA industry, some coaches that Ali was involved with, some people whose guys he managed, and it was very interesting to see how much people were trying to stifle the story just because it might come back on him and his family. But as I've dug in and as I've gone further, it's not just his current family that's been affected by all of this. He's got these kids that he's abandoned, and one of the I think the things that made me, I don't even know what the proper word is. I found it very telling to me that one of his children he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, and had given no financial support to him, no presents. Apparently the kid called him on his 13th birthday, thought he'd give him one more shot. Ali didn't return his phone call. And, as news of what I'm writing about comes out, all of a sudden he reaches out to this kid and invites him to World Series of Fighting's last event. So, to use a kid as a pawn, and this kid, I've talked to his mother and his stepfather. He sounds like he's got a much better life than he would have had if Ali was in and out of his life, because he's well adjusted, he's loved, he's cared for. But the hardest part for me to swallow is the fact that Ali brags about all the money he makes, all of his guys, and he doesn't even take care of his own kids. That's, as a father, that to me is I just don't understand it. But hopefully if Nevada digs in on it, they're very, very sticky about cases that involve people not paying their child support. So you never know. They could intervene, hopefully, and get this kid what, at least monetarily, what was owed to him via the courts back in 1999.
Well, he might even then have to ask his fighters for 25% of their purse rather than 20.
I don't think he's starving, man. When you think of, with the auto shopper deal I was kind of outlining with you earlier.
Yes, I remember that, yeah.
He was getting a percentage of the deal because he brought Auto Shopper in. So let's say World Series of Fighting paid him between 15 and 20% of what they made. The fighters that he gave the deals to, because he was actually getting a paycheck from Auto Shopper, and they also provided him with a brand new vehicle because of this, and he was their rep, and I've got emails demonstrating that he was their rep. So he was getting paid by the fighter, the promotion, and the sponsor. He was triple dipping. So the problem with that is, kind of spread it out so it didn't look like it was just his fighters, he'd trade other managers and say, listen, I'll give you this if you give me one from your main sponsor. And so there was this monopoly going on where the sponsorships were just being passed around to, his fighters and a few other fighters. But, to me, right off the bat, the World Series of Fighting should have dug in a little bit deeper. I'm also told that there was a time where 3 events in a row, the sponsor check from Auto Shopper just went missing. And as they dug in, started going through the books, they found out, and Ali finally admitted it. And, I don't know if he ever came clean on it as far as paying everything back, but I was told there was about $50,000 that he owed back at that time. And this was from somebody that was, directly dealing with the situation at the time. And I've confirmed with one other person that this did take place. So, as far as people saying, oh, you've got all these allegations, I've checked and I've vetted my sources, and as far as documentations and emails go, I've seen a lot of emails that I can or can't speak of depending on the chain of custody. I don't want to reveal my sources because them and another person have this email, right? So a lot of things get forwarded inadvertently through a lot of these organizations. So that's, a lot of the things, and the reason why it took me 10 months was because I had to make sure that all of my sources were legit. I had to make sure that I had documentation because, let's be honest, I'm an independent. It's going to be a little bit harder for me to defend myself than it is a major place like that that's going to try to shut me down as far as World Series of Fighting goes. And you've, as I told you about the invite I've gotten from World Series of Fighting to come visit, right? It's like, yeah, I've seen The Sopranos. I know what happens in New York when people come for a visit, right?
Yeah. There'll be a live streaming of your death, yes.
Yeah, I couldn't get over it. Well, at first I was like, come on, this is... I'm like, there's nothing that we can't talk about over the phone that's going to change my mind if I go to an event. Events are, to me, you're just shining bright lights in my eyes and making me think, wow, they're not going out of business. Well, that was the least of what we discussed in either of our reports between mine and Bloody Elbows. There's a lot more serious things, and all I wanted Bruce Dyfick to answer when we were talking, as far as we were chatting back and forth, and he kept not answering the question was, I wanted him to know, or I wanted to know if he was involved in, or if he knew about the meeting that happened in 2014 about Ali being a part of that book and his past. and about the concerns that were raised by other executives that were ignored. And the other thing I wanted to know was why he blocked the vote, that happened to eliminate Ali from World Series of Fighting. He was actually voted out unanimously, and Dyfik was one of the guys that voted on it. But as soon as Sean Lampman went to jail and Dyfik took the complete control of the company, it just never happened. And he became basically his right-hand man. And you know what? I see it as these are all business guys, real estate guys, investors. Not one of them, except for Ray and Ali, had much of any knowledge about the MMA business. So, when you've got guys like that come forward with contacts that, love them because they've always got, fights for them and everything else, it's a very vast resource that you're using. But you know what? You can't overlook these things that I've uncovered, because it's very serious when you're knowingly let people break the law and break statutes that are in place to protect fighters, promotions. This isn't just, they allowed him to steal for himself and put money, no different than if he stole money from petty cash, right?
Yeah.
He's negotiating both sides of the table, which it baffles me how people don't get that.
And you think to yourself about the checks before, well, obviously I don't know how the IRS work in the United States, I'm not sure how it works all there, but, does that come to light? Do the IRS not know about this? Do they know about this 50,000? That's a question you got to think and ask yourself. Did he disclose this? Because if he did, then obviously he's done it. But maybe he hasn't disclosed it. He's just cashed his checks, little by little to make that. There's a lot of questions there just in that side of things as well. Are the IRS even looking into this? That's another question you got to think about as well.
Well, you look at even some of his fighters that are making 300, 400, 500,000 per fight between sponsorships and purses. Guys like Verdum and some of these guys that are getting paid quite well. Yeah. He's taking 20%. So let's say he gets $300,000. Ali takes $60K, probably cash. You can bet it's not going into bank accounts if he has questionable business dealings. So where's all that money going? Plus he got $100,000 from World Series of Fighting. He could be making $500,000 a year, depending on, he says he's got 40 to 50 clients that he takes all of this percentage from. So, there's no excuse why $40K in child support, or, maybe even making the exact same payment to the other kid that hasn't gone after him for child support. There's no excuse for it in my eyes. So, you know what? Go clear up your debts, and then, maybe fess up about your past when you fill out the application, and then, I just don't get how he thinks he should just be able to avoid the law in his jurisdiction. Nevada has a very clear law, and if he moves to California, it's even worse for him, because they do FBI checks on all of their managers.
Oh, do they? Oh,
for a reason.
Well, because World Series of Fighting are going to try and base themselves in New York, didn't they say? Didn't they when they got?
I think that was based around Ali, and it was before the announcement was made that they let him go. I think he was going to move back to New York and run the business.
Right. Okay.
So because he's got his roots all there, and he's got Enzo's there. Mm-hmm. He's got a very big. That's a lot of his fighters train in New York and New Jersey as well.
Right. Then that explains a lot. Yep. Well, look, I hope they go to California then, in my eyes. To be fair, I would be shocked and amazed if they are not bought out by, I know it's RaceF will put that video up, the IMG meeting. If they get bought out, then happy days. Hopefully then they'll wash away all of these people. But at the same time, if they don't, I am going to be flabbergasted if they can keep going, because they don't make money on their cards. There's no way they make a profit. No. They don't sell out at any events. They pay extortionate prices for fighters who are not. The fighters on their promotions are getting paid a lot more than guys in the UFC who are a higher level caliber of fighters, and they keep making losses. I don't know how you can keep going when you keep losing so much. And especially when doing, like you say, those 4 title fights on the New Year's card. At the worst time of year, in my opinion, the worst place to do it. I can't fathom it. I can't fathom how they can go on after that.
No, and I'm told it depends on which theater is at Madison Square Gardens, but one of the theaters only holds about 2,000 people. So if they're going to put on a televised card at a place like that, it's going to look really bad on NBC. But here's the other thing: NBC, they haven't had an NBC card in about 2 years because there were some issues that they had. I won't go into them right now because it's pretty sensitive, and I probably should think about exactly how I word it. But there was I've got myself in trouble before, but there was an incident at the last event that they actually had on NBC that prompted NBC to tell them no more live events on regular NBC for the last 2 years. So, there were some issues, and apparently this is their last shot, but I think they're using that NBC money, which is significantly more than what they were getting on NBC Sports, as almost a bailout for them to be able to cover a lot of their expenses, because they've got to get $1 million per person, like per fighter, insurance policy, and as a lot of people have pointed out, they haven't even made that at any of the underwriters yet. So it's a new territory because New York has made these new rules to try to stiffen up on promotions, and it's when they come in, they're going to have to pay for it, and I don't know if World Series of Fighting is going to be able to, especially longevity wise, keep up that pace of having to pay that much money. They're gonna dump a ton of money into that event, and like you said, I think logistically it's a nightmare. I think all the people that are going down to Times Square for New Year's are going to make it crazy for people to try to get. People camp out overnight to get a spot right at the front of Times Square. So you think you're going to be able to just hop in and off of the subway, or get to your hotel if you're in town for that show? It's not going to be like the UFC's New York event. It's as much glitz and glamour as they're throwing in there, and they think it's going to be like a Japanese event. The difference is the Japanese events never actually happened on the 31st, and in Japan they were so well attended because it was an event in itself, and they don't really celebrate New Year's like we do. It's more of a somber time for reflection. So a day or two before New Year's, then it's a great time for them to get out and go to a party and watch the spectacle that is Pride or Dream or Rising. So I think they're overestimating the power of holding a New Year's Eve event and holding it in New York. I think those are just you're just wrapping up a crappy present in really bright shiny paper.
And you got to think, getting the fighters to the venue. You got to make sure what the traffic's going to be like, where the hotel's going to be. They got to make sure, they might have to make sure the hotel's close to the venue, just in case the fighter might have to walk there because of the traffic. You don't know what the traffic's going to be like at that time of day, because obviously they split the card in half. You have your early prelim guys who go there early, and then the main card go a little bit later. And there's a lot of logistics to take into context there.
Yeah, did you see John Fitch did an interview? I think it was yesterday or today, where he was basically saying he hopes it happens, because he said he was one of the only fighters. Of course, he's part of the MMA Fighters Association, so he's never been one to not speak out. But he actually said, he's concerned about these lawsuits and the info that came out last week about MMA or World Series of Fighting. It's all behind the scenes, he said, but it could affect things. And he's hoping that this fight with Shields, it's been put off multiple times, will happen. And Jake Shields, of course, is another guy that Ali apparently manages. So we've got another card. Their last card in Kansas City was half filled with Dominance MMA fighters. So to pay the amount of money that they're paying a lot of these champions, more than $100,000 per fight, when the UFC champions, some of them barely make that, if they make it at all. I don't know if they can keep up that pace either, because you're bringing in guys that are like, have you even heard of Marlon Moraes' opponent before?
No, I wanted to say that when I heard that get announced, I think everyone just went on Google and went, who?
I already forget his name. And you know what? I'm not saying he's not a good fighter, but Moraes was trying to sell that fight pretty hard to Ariel Helwani. He even said that. He goes, he said, I've got a harder job, because usually when you fight a really good fighter, it sells itself. He said, I have to sell people on that fight. Well, that's not his job.
No.
That should never be up to a fighter to have to do. If you have to sell a fight to people, chances are that fight, as much as it could go either way, chances are that fight is a mismatch.
Yeah, exactly. You look at a good one is, and you think about how much he's getting paid. TJ Dillashaw, when he was the UFC champ, was on $35K.
Yeah, there you go.
And he starched Renan Barão twice. Who was the king of the bantamweight division for an extended period of time. He starched him, absolutely starched him, and you think $35K for that? Well done, lad. Yeah, if you go on World Series of Fighting, you'll get paid more than double, and you'll have easier opponents.
You will if you sign through Dominance MMA, and that's been the pitch of Ali's for quite some time.
Yes,
you sign with me, I'll get you more money, and he has. He's proved it. But the worst part about it is, he brings all of his guys in and takes care of them, but whose detriment was it to? World Series of Fighting has lost money because of some of the deals he set up, which is, when I brought my original complaint forward to World Series of Fighting in 2013, I spoke with Sean Lampman on the phone. He expressed concerns about it, said he was aware of Ali's conflicts of interest, which was true. We saw through the email chains that I posted from another source over the story last week. But he told me this story about how he started World Series of Fighting because of David Loiseau. And it was because he learned what David Loiseau made for his fight with Rich Franklin, which was, I'm not 100% sure what it was, but it was peanuts compared to, what he should have been making at the time. So Lampman actually wanted to start $1 million tournament where the guy who won 3 fights would win $1 million. And these guys were starting at 15 and 15 and moving up from there. So they were all going to be paid very, very handsomely. And the promotion was going to take a very low percentage of the take. It was going to be basically what the Ali Act mandates for boxing in the States. And that's that promoters can only take a maximum of 20%. 80% has to go back to the fighters. I think, that's loosely kind of based on it. There's other stipulations, but that's kind of where the gist of it is, that it's an 80-20 split, and that's the way it should be. Fighters are the ones that, without the fighters, there would be no sport. And, I think promoters kind of use their power a little bit too much to say, if you don't want to negotiate and do what we say we want you to do, then guess what? We're going to cut you. And, it's too bad because we're never seeing the best fighters fight the best fighters. So hopefully that changes and they get this Ali Act in play.
That would be amazing. Yeah, I'm so for that to happen. I got my fingers crossed on that one, definitely. Oh, Mike, honestly, Mike, there is so much going on with this story. I like it. We said at the start, the site to go to. I hope that you're going to do so. I would like to maybe think that maybe you should do like a memoir thing, something. So it's got almost like a diary with all the dates in, something like that. I think that something like that would be amazing for this.
Yeah, so you can a timeline.
Yeah, with a timeline in, so you can just go obviously up to the present day. I'd probably wait till after the events of the Nevada Athletic State Commission go through and stuff like that. But I think something like that would be amazing. That would be a very big book to read. But at the same time, it would be a fascinating book. You could probably put a lot more information into there as well. In relation to emails, etc. I think that would be something that would be ideal for all of this.
Yeah, you know what? I've thought about it. I've thought about putting it out either as an ebook, just because the stories are so long as they are right now. A lot of people kind of lose interest after the first few paragraphs because we live in an ADHD society. I say that I've got ADHD, so I get where that analogy comes from. But it's true. We want stuff fast. We'd rather have video of people reading you the stories. But it's too bad because long form journalism is dying, and it's a dying art form that a few people, like you mentioned Karim earlier. Karim, also from Canada here. So we've got some people that are really, pushing to clean up the sport here in Canada. And I think, we've done a good job with guys like Karim. Karim's always a guy that's not afraid to put the news out. And he's been threatened before. I've heard some stories. He had a veiled threat by Ali about not taking my name out of one of his stories. And, I think, people need to, as far as they talk about an MMA Fighters Association, I've been pushing for an MMA Writers Association because, you know what, when people, kind of diminish work that people have done, like myself, like Karim, other people, and I'm sure some people will say this is a big sob story, but it actually takes away from the legitimacy of a story. And if a story is well written and the facts are there and they're laid out and, there's no real question of who the sources are, then there's no real reason for people to say, I hope another outlet can come and prove these stories.
Yes.
I've worked for all of these big organizations. I've written for the UFC. I've written for, Fox Sports, Yahoo Sports, UFC Magazine, Fighters Only Magazine, Fight Magazine. My credentials shouldn't really be in question just because I'm writing for my own independent website. I started my website as a place that, was a catch-all for stuff that Yahoo didn't want. And that was all my investigative stuff that I was putting all this time into. So, I hope that people, read the stuff that I'm putting out there and use their open mind to kind of, do their own research and think about the possibilities of everything. Because I'll tell you, man, there's a lot to digest and a lot to think about. But, there's a lot of kind of scary sides to this, that the what ifs are what concern me the most.
That is the thing. There's so many what ifs. It's crazy the amount of information you've got, which you've backed up, and yet there's still a lot of what ifs. It's almost like every time you find something, more what ifs are created. So it's kind of like you think to yourself, I need to stop finding it because I'm never going to get all the what ifs answered.
Yeah. Well, and that's it too, you know. And the reason, I'll be honest, the reason I've taken 10 months to gather all the information, get all the facts that I can, was because there were questions that I had myself. But you know, a lot of colleagues were saying, yeah, you just copied a book. You know, there were other people that were saying that, oh, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. It doesn't sound real. So I wanted the most complete picture. And like I said, the article that I just put out is it's a sliver of the information that I have, and you know, probably the series of articles I still have in me.
It is a fantastic third addition to this monstrous story, is the best way to put it. Honestly, I am hooked. Whenever you what annoys me is you tease about when you're going to put it out. So I have to. I would rather you didn't say when you're putting it out and just put it out. I am sitting there and I'm waiting. Then you went, this recent one, you went, oh, something went wrong. And I went, you're having, are you kidding me? I literally was at work because you said you were going to do it at 9 a.m. on the Monday or Tuesday. And I was sat in work at 1 o'clock on my lunch break thinking, that's it. I'm sorted. I'm going to sit at my desk and read this. Oh, how dare you? How dare you let me down?
Yeah, you know what? That was my fault. It was one of those, like, honestly, I had, like I told you, I had a phone call at like 2 a.m. and it kind of changed. I almost rewrote that complete story overnight. I had 2 hours sleep, just long enough to set my alarm for between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Got up, finished it. Then I told you I went into my temp job all day lifting furniture. So, you know, it's not a glorious job to be an independent, as I'm sure you know. You know, I don't make any money off of this right now.
Same here, yeah. This is all off our own backs.
People think if you're not getting paid, you're not putting out good content. And it's like, man, I've made as much money as anybody in the sport writing, you know, at certain times in my life. And I don't think money necessarily actually adds to your credibility, because there are a lot of people that either aren't making money or aren't making much money, but have put out some pretty amazing content. So, you know, I hope that people don't, you know, it's amazing how people can kind of discount what you do for whatever reasons. You know, I've had people say, oh, it's personal. Well, you know what? It is personal that Ali has been allowed to take advantage of people, the system, the sport for so many years. Yeah, you know what? He's made some personal comments about me in the media that maybe have motivated me to keep digging in, but it's not. I don't have a vendetta against him. I just, you know, from 2013, I've known that he's been acting illegally in the sport. What am I supposed to do? Just you know, let that kind of get swept under the rug like a lot of people do, just because they have reasons to? I had no reason to protect the information that I had.
And I am thankful, Mike, that you've stuck it out there. Look, we're gonna wrap it up there because, like I say, mate, this is a rabbit hole of fantastic information we can go through. We spoke before about a lot of things as well, and there is more to come. And I am so annoyed I have to wait. It's almost like watching The Walking Dead has started, and you have to wait for The Walking Dead to start again. It's killing me that, you know, now you have to wait once a week for the new Walking Dead. I'm like, I just want it all at once. It's that kind of, like you said, the ADHD. You know, we just want everything there, bang, 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 right now. But look. I'm going to put all the links in the description below anyway for everyone to jump into, because I'm going to push it. I'm going to put it on our Facebook page, on Twitter. I'm going to stick it all out there, even on the Instagram. I'm going to stick it all out. But look, before I let you shoot off, before we finish up, just let everyone know what your site is again, what your Twitter handle is, and just, like, you know, ways to kind of reach out to you.
Sure. Yeah. You can connect. My website is realfightstories.com, all one word. You can connect with me. Typically, I go through Twitter. I use Twitter for, you know, it's linked to all my other accounts too. I'm not a big Instagram guy. I don't like pictures as much but, you know, best way to get me is on Twitter at Mike Russell MMA, one word. You know what? If you follow me on Twitter, I do kind of leak little bits of information here and there as I get them. John, I'll add you to one of the people that I send some little tidbits to. I've been sending you kind of screen grabs of conversations and stuff I have. The other thing that does is if anything ever happens to me, everybody knows who to suspect. So
magically you'll be found late. You'll be found with a sofa on top of you.
Yeah, or out in a boat ride where I get a confession before I'm thrown into the bay.
Look, Mike, honestly, I've loved this. was addicted before when I read the articles, and the fact that we talked obviously a bit off air and on it, I love it. Love this. I love the fact that someone's putting the time and effort in, and I think you need to let that get out there. Not just written form, verbal form. We've got some of it out there. We're going to make everyone go and read the rest because it's well worth a good read, people. So again, Mike, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fantastic for me to have you on here.
My pleasure, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk, and then maybe I'll come back on to break down some of the other stuff that we're gonna probably release in the near future. So we're gonna have to cover this NAC thing, like I told you. Lunville's gone, so I'm gonna have to follow up because Bob Bennett's not answering me. So I've talked to the Attorney General's office, left messages with them to get back to me to let me know where it's going. So we just need some accountability to see. All I want is that if it's investigated properly and everybody looks into the right things and weighs all the evidence, then fine. Whatever the findings are, I guess that those are what the findings are.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean we have to just swallow it, but I just think that the last time around he just Bob Bennett let him off a little bit too easily by just saying we'll just leave World Series of Fighting if that's what he did. So hopefully we look into this whole licensing issue and get to the bottom of it.
Agreed, my friend. Agreed. Look, ladies and gentlemen, that is Mike Russell. Thank you very much, sir.